Hi. All right, we're now going to discuss how to deploy the Cisco SD WAN controllers on-prem. Basically, you have a choice of deploying them in your own public or private cloud or at your data center. As well as we're also going to cover how to set up an enterprise certificate authority if you're a managed service or provider. Okay, and we're actually sitting down on, we're going to go through actually the next section. So, okay. And we're going to deploy, basically we're going to run through the OVFs and how to deploy each controller in VMware. Okay? So, when you install controllers on sites, the requirements are as follows. Remember, our SD-WAN architecture enforces a strict separation of the management and control planes. For this reason, all controllers must have two interfaces. So when they deploy these OVFs, we're going to have two VNICs in them. One for VPN 0 for the control interface and one for VPN 512 for the management interface. On the control interface, only control protocols are permitted. VPN 0 is always the control interface. If you hear VPN 0, I want you to translate that in your head to control. Okay? If you hear VPN 512, I want you to translate that to mean management. And as like the control interface, on the management interface, only management protocols, SSH and HTTPS, are going to be permitted. And this basically enforces a strict zone-based security model. At first installation, only a few parameters are required for bringing up a management plane between the controllers. Connectivity, system IP, site ID, organization name, and the vBond IP. And by connectivity, I mean like IP address, subnet mask, and default gateway. You can deploy the controllers on any hypervisor shown on this slide, ESXi, KVM, AWS, or MS Azure. Okay? So, step one, go to cisco.com and go to the we'll have the virtualization description in the next slides. Basically what we're going to do is we're going to download an OVF. We're going to perform the installation and initial configuration, host name, NTP. We'll then configure the system IP, site ID, and organization name. And if we have a local CA, we're going to install that root CA chain and resynchronize those vManage databases. Okay? So for vManage, remember this is our single pane of glass. This is where we're going to configure the entire system. This is where we're going to be monitoring the system. So we're going to have two drives on this one, but I want to mention that we're going to have an install drive and then we're going to have a database volume as well. So note that here in this column that we're going to have a database volume. Please also note this at the bottom that only solid-state drives are currently supported. And it's going to be sized based on the number of sites that are supported. So remember, if we have multiple vEdges in a site, that still counts as one site. Okay? So to install the OVF template, select it in Deploy OVF template in VMware. Select the OVF, and then make sure you thick provision it. The reason we want to thick provision these is we don't want to have delays while we're expanding the volume. Okay? We're going to do thick provision lazy zeroed. So just so you're aware, in the OVF, there's only one network controller. We're going to add another one afterwards. But make sure you choose the controller's LAN for connecting to this, because we're going to connect to it via the controller's LAN to do all the configuration. Okay? After the configuration settings, click Finish. Don't power it on yet. We're going to add a couple of things. We have to add a hard disk for the database volume and a network interface card for our management connection. And we also require a second hard disk on which to store the large database. Let's go back here. I just want to take this back real quick so you can see the size of that drive you're going to have to add for each of the sizes. So if you've got 1,000 sites, we're going to want to add a second 1 terabyte volume for that database. Okay? And basically you just go to Add on the hardware. So basically edit settings on the system. And then go add a hard disk. We're going to add a hard disk, and then we're also going to add an Ethernet adapter. We'll create a new disk, also thick provision lazy zero. It's going to be 100 gig in this example. This is going to contain all that configuration and operational data for the entire network, or networks if it's multi-tenant. Thus, a significant amount of disk space is going to be required for this database. And make sure that the virtual device node is IDE 0:1. SCSI will not work in this. Okay? And then we're going to need an Ethernet adapter, and then making sure, and then label it, and then put it in the management LAN. The first one, remember, was the controller's LAN. So remember, this is VPN 512. The other one was VPN 0. Just so you know, this is the wiring up of the VM and must be done correctly to have connectivity. Remember, we need to maintain sure both of this connectivity is available. Otherwise, we won't be able to bring up the environment. Okay? At the first boot, you're going to have to choose which of the 2 available storage devices to use for the vManage database. You're probably going to want to choose the big one you just added, that you just set up. Before usage, of course, you're going to need to format it. Then vManage is going to reboot and are ready for initial configuration. Okay? So it's basically limited to 5 basic parameters. It really isn't a lot of configuration. Basically, the system IP. In here, it's a real IP address. Let me note this guy. So here's the real IP address that we set. That can be anything. It can be, as long as it looks like an IP address, so it's a 255, 1 through 255 in each field, but it's not actually a routable ID. We have our site ID, our organization name. I'd like to note, this must match on every single node. If it's got a space or one of them's not capitalized or something, they will not connect together as the same organization. We're also going to specify the IP address of vBond here. This is really, really important. And then we're going to do a commit and quit. Now, the way we save this, so if you're familiar with Cisco routers, you do config T, you configure stuff, hit exit. Every time you type a command, it automatically takes effect. In this, we're going to do a commit and quit to actually get that to save. On the management side, so now remember we're VPN 512, we're going to specify an interface. Basically, this attaches that interface to this VPN. Okay, so interfaces are subject to subordinate to the VPNs they're assigned to. And here's an IP address. We always enter these as CIDR notation. If you're not familiar, that's classless interdomain routing, which means it's the IP address, a slash, and then the number of subnet bits. Okay, that's all you need to configure a vManage. I know I scribbled all over that, but there isn't much more configuration than that from a vManage standpoint. Okay. And then we have to create a transport interface. On the transport interface, again, it's VPN 0. All right, we put an interface inside VPN 0. Sorry, I crossed that out when I meant to underline it. Again, IP address, no shut it, of course. Exit, and then we're going to add a route statement. Okay, again, we're classless interdomain routing again, so it's a 0-0 route, and the next hop is 10.0.0.1. This needs to be routable, of course, and this is how we're going to actually have our connection. You can kind of think of VPNs like VRFs, virtual routing and forwarders, and you assign interfaces to VPNs, and then you configure. Each VPN is going to have its own default route. In the example in this configure, you can see the default route for that transport. And of course, we also need NTP, because if we don't have NTP, we can't synchronize logs, and if we can't synchronize logs at the same time, we can't correlate log entries, so which means we can't do any analysis. So NTP forever. All right, so let's say you're not using the built-in certificates and you're using a local certificate authority, let's say Microsoft Certificate Authority or any other. We're going to need to copy that root certificate into the system. Okay? So remember, all the SD-WAN devices are going to use certificates to authenticate all communications. All right? Each device has to have the trust anchor, which is the root certificate of the certificate authority. And we're going to use this root CA to authenticate all the other devices' certificate, which is also going to be signed by the same CA. Okay? So after that CA root certificate is on the system, then we're going to import it using the CLI shown in the figure. This is an API call. So if you've never seen one of these before, basically what we're doing is we opened a URL to this guy. This executes that API, and then we get a done back indicating that it was successful. Okay? And of course, that's the vManage IP, whatever the IP address of the vManage you just set up. Okay? And we mentioned APIs before. I wanted to mention that we do actually use an API here. And then we have 2 commands we can do to make sure that the certificate took. Basically, we're going to do that show certificate root CA. And what we want to make sure is on all devices, the root CA matches serial number